Hello and welcome to Film Companion South. In this episode of FC Flashback, we will be talking about Kuruthipunal, which turned 25 this year. The film starred Kamal Haasan, Arjun, Gautami, Geetha. It was shot and directed by P.C. Sriram. Artistically speaking, this period, the 90 to 95 phase roughly, that is the post-Michael Vandana Kamarajan pre-Indian phase, was Kamal's big tragedy phase. I'm not talking about the Singar villains and the Kalinians which kept coming now and then. I'm just talking about the films that we identify today as Kamal films, the ones that have a signature on them, and they were all kind of tragic in some way or the other. He either died or ended up living but without an arm, or he ended up suffering from cancer, or he ended up with a dead wife. And Kuruthipunal was no different. The film, which came out in 1995, is a fairly faithful remake of Govind Nihalani's excellent Drohkal. But one of the reasons I wanted to talk about Kuruthipunal here is Drohkal is an excellent film, right? But Kuruthipunal is a textbook example of how to take something that is considered somewhat parallel cinema, that is off mainstream cinema, and revolve it around a hero, make it a hero-centric mainstream narrative. Kuruthipunal is also an example of how an auteur, which is certainly what I call Kamal, can take material that is someone else's and make it his own. Before we get to Kuruthipunal, some bits of trivia about Drohkal. This was the film which A.R. Rahman was supposed to make his Hindi film debut in, according to the book A.R. Rahman, The Musical Storm. Okay, another bit of trivia. The police operation in this film, in Kuruthipunal, is called Operation Dhanush, and one of the key members of this operation is Arvind Krishna, who would go on to be the cinematographer of Pudupettai, which actually starred Dhanush. Another bit of trivia, Drohkal is the film in which Manoj Bajpayee made his debut. So back to Kuruthipunal, there are two things that make it a more mainstream film, and this is the very definition of a mainstream film, right? One, there is a lot more drama.
கொஞ்சம் dramatic-ஆ இருந்தாலும் அதை follow பண்றதா ரொம்ப நல்லது.
And two, there is a lot more emotion. In a way, the same contrast would be commented upon later, almost 2 decades later, when Kamal acted in Papanasam, which was a remake of Drishyam under the same director though, Geetha Joseph. And people said that Kamal did a more sentimental, more emotional, more dramatic version of what Mohanlal did. But that is the mainstreaming we're talking about here. This is the Tamil mainstream. Now let's compare some of the scenes in Drohkal and Kuruthipunal and talk about this mainstreamization and how Kamal did it. In Drohkal, when a senior officer kills himself, we just hear the sound of the shot and then we cut to Om Puri's reaction. Om Puri is the one playing the Kamal role in Drohkal. In Kuruthipunal, the man blows out his brains. Now consider the last scene where the protagonist, that is Om Puri / Kamal, asks the man that he's put into Operation Dhanush to kill him because then the operation can go on unhindered. With Om Puri, the instruction to kill is a whisper.
Fire at me! Fire!
With Kamal, well, it's a bloody order.
Shoot me! That's a bloody order!
Drohkal ends with Om Puri's death. In Kuruthipunal, we have Kamal die, but beyond that there is an emotional scene where Kamal's widow goes up and gets a medal to the strains of Sare Jahan Se Acha. And this harks back to a bus where school students, it's an early scene where school students were singing Sare Jahan Se Acha. Sare Jahan Se Acha. So we talked about the hero's death. What about the hero's birth? That is the introduction scene. In Drohkal, it's a very dramatic scene where Om Puri wakes up from a nightmare. So we know that the man is haunted by something. He is kind of mentally not quite there, right? In Tamil though, in Kuruthipunal, the first scene is that of a letter from Adi being read out. Adi is Adi Narayanan, the Kamal Haasan character.
ஜென்டில்மேன், இந்த மீட்டிங்க்கு முன்னால மிஸ்டர் ஆதி எனக்கு எழுதின ஒரு லெட்டரை படிக்க விரும்புறேன்.
Now the police officer first starts reading out the letter, and then Kamal's voice takes over, overlaps over the police officer's voice, and then the contents of the letter lay out the background of the film that is going to follow.
அரசியலும் வன்முறையும் ஒப்பந்தம் செய்து கொண்டு
அக்னி சாட்சியாக ஜோடி சேர்ந்து விட்டன.
So yes, this character has none of the weakness that the original person had, that is the Ompuri character had, but the mainstreamization as it is comes through in a very classy manner. It doesn't cheapen the memory of the original. Yes, Kamal does all the things that the traditional Tamil action hero would do. And yet look at his intro shot. He's just a cop in a jeep looking at his watch. There is no special framing, no 1 foot getting out and slow-mo, nothing like that. And note how he is shown as being vulnerable as well. He may not be waking up from a nightmare in the very first scene, but he is unable to save a busload of school children from being blown up. And much worse, like in Drogakal, his family, his wife, his son are in constant danger throughout the second half of the film. Now this scene that you just saw is an amazing scene. I just love this scene. Now remember, the film came out 25 years ago, right? At that point, it was still a man's duty to protect his wife's honor or manam or karpu or whatever you want to call it. But here, Kamal is nowhere in the picture. Gautami saves herself. Only Kamal, I think, would have had the guts to keep the scene as it is without changing it to suit the hero so that he goes and rescues his wife. Now let's look at the dialogues, which are a major part of any mainstream movie. The most legendary dialogue in Kuruthipunal is, of course, this one.
வீரன் என்ன தெரியுமா? பயம் இல்லாத மாதிரி நடிக்கிறதா. உன் பயத்தை உன் கண்ணில் நான் பார்த்துட்டேன்.
But there are many other powerful lines.
உன் கண்ணில் கலாச்சார பலம் தெரியுது. என் நேர்மையை கேலி செஞ்சா எனக்கு பிடிக்காது. நீ என்ன கொண்டுட்டா, ஓ மிடில் கிளாஸ் மனசாட்சி உன்னை உறுத்தி கொண்டுடும்.
Both Drogakal and Kuruthipunal are shot and directed by legendary cinematographers Govind Nihalani and P.C. Sriram. While Drogakal is a relatively naturalistic looking film, P.C. Sriram makes Kuruthipunal a visually very dramatic film. Just look at the prison cell in both films. In Drogakal, you see a very naturalistic looking prison cell. In Kuruthipunal, it is stylized, it's impressionistic. Look at the same scene here. There is an additional sense of composition here with two characters from opposing camps facing two different directions. When Ompuri talks with Ashish Vidyarthi, it's a very naturalistic conversation. But when Kamal talks to Nasir, it is stylized. You see Nasir's reflection in his sunglasses. So which means there's a formal element that goes into the film beyond the original that was Drogakal. And that's the famous P.C. Sriram lighting. Now compare these shots from the two films. And very often, within the same frame, we find a warm-cold color contrast. That is a bluish tone, a cold tone, and a yellowish-brownish tone, a warm tone, both within the same frame, both indicating two different emotional temperatures that keep crossing between the good guys and the bad guys. And this color contrast, this warm and cold, this spills over into scenes not involving Kamal and Nasir as well, into the scenes involving the other people as well. Sometimes the warm-cold contrast is present even in the color of the clothes. The second hero in Drogakal is played by Naseeruddin Shah. He's a secular Muslim. In the scene that you just saw, if you want to read into colors, he's wearing a green shirt, and green traditionally is the color associated with Islam. But he's also shown with a tilak during a puja. In Kuruthipunal, this character is played by Arjun, and we get a terrific mass/mainstream shot with Kamal and Arjun standing side by side and slowly turning to the camera. And now that's not there in Drogakal. And one really interesting change in the screenwriting, now it's really interesting to compare these two, and the reason I'm doing that is because both are valid approaches to filmmaking, right? You want to make a naturalistic film, you want to make an impressionistic, expressionistic, whatever you want to call it, but you want the film to be dramatic as possible to draw a mainstream audience. So that's why this comparison is happening. Now, when they go chasing a key person in the gang, the bad guy's gang, at first the Ompuri character fails, and then the second hero, Naseeruddin Shah, goes later and apprehends the guy. But in Kuruthipunal, it's Kamal who does the capture. Again, you're mainstreaming it because you have to give the hero some heroic things to do, because you're kind of emasculating him in the second half, which is not a problem in Drokal because that's anyway a kind of an arty film. So the audience there is prepared for any kind of thing for the hero to do. But here, when you're showing the hero is not able to take care of his own family, you have to build him up as at least this heroic guy in order to then destroy that heroism, so that people at least know that he's not like a complete loser throughout. Again, it's mainstreaming but keeping the spirit of the original. When you do so much that's different for Tamil cinema, you also have to give the audience things that they like you to do. Now the villain, who's a big part of any mainstream cinema, in Hindi he's played by a terrific Ashish Vidyarthi, and in Tamil he's played by a terrific Nasir. Now again, looking at the mainstreamization angle, look at these two scenes involving the villain. Now this villain is captured very early on, and I don't know if I need to give a spoiler alert for a 25-year-old movie, but anyway, there may be one here. Basically, he's captured, then they think that he's a driver. They don't know that he's actually the leader of the whole operation, the gang, the Naxal gang, the communist gang, whatever you want to call it. Now, he's in prison, and in Drokal, you see Ashish Vidyarthi kind of in a chair. He's bare-chested because they've stripped him, they've kind of probably beaten him, and there's some saliva dripping from him. And Om Puri reaches out to his specs and tries to put them on Ashish Vidyarthi, and Ashish Vidyarthi catches his hand as if to say, listen, I may be beaten up, I may be squashed, I may be thrashed, but I don't need your help. But with Nasir, the same scene plays out differently. Kamal basically circles him and pats him on the shoulder, and he's just about to do that again when Nasir catches his hand and says, don't you dare touch me. He doesn't say it actually, but that's the sense you get because there's more electricity in the scene. You get the sense that he's saying, don't you dare touch me. Again, the point is that this is broader, this is more mainstream. The audience is going to get a much bigger kick out of this than that. Another bit of trivia, Ashish Vidyarthi won the Best Supporting Actor National Award for Drokal, and that same year, another person won, and there is a Kamal connection there too, because the other person that won was Nagesh for Namavar. Now, Kamal always likes to push the envelope, and Kuruthipunal was the first film that used Dolby Stereo SR technology. There are no songs in this film. Mahesh Mahadevan, who composed the songs of Namavar earlier, composed the background score here. Now, in a Hindu interview, P.C. Sriram said that he wanted the omen of death to appear on Nasir's face every time he appeared. So, Sangu Udra Madri, like a conch shell being blown during the funeral rites, right? And this is what you hear in this scene.
நல்ல டீல். ஓகே ஓகே சொல்லு. நீ தோக்குற சைடுல இருந்துகிட்டு உன் திறமையை வேஸ்ட் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்க. எங்க சைடுக்கு வா.
Now for the Kamalisms, that's what we live for, right? With Kamal Haasan films, we live for the Kamalisms. And seen today, Kuruthipunal has a lot of callbacks to many of his other films. The sodium pentothal injection scene is reminiscent of the sodium pentothal that was given to Guna, and the writer of Guna actually plays a part in this movie as well as one of the terrorist gang. Like in Mahanadi, we have a pedophile. Like in Hey Ram, we have an unwavering, staunch Muslim and a Hindu who is easily swayed. Like in Tevar Magan, Gautami gets a huge dramatic scene. And like in many Kamal films, we get a ton of English language.
Of course, you must be knowing English. The strategy is to delay, disable, and disintegrate.
It's for you.
You bastard. என்ன உனக்கு வேலை செய்ய சொல்றியா? You punk. Kill that blackguard. Kill the damn blackguard. நீங்க தயவு செய்யுங்க. It's a matter of life and death, sir. Shoot me, my man, my boy. Shoot me.
And finally, you have the Kamal touches, the nods to Gandhi, the nods to atheism.
எதுலயாவது நம்பிக்கை இருக்கா? கண்டிப்பா கடவுள் நம்பிக்கை இருக்காது. எனக்கும் இல்ல அப்படி நான் நம்புவியா?
இத கிட்ட வெச்சுக்க. சாமி
எல்லாம் வேணாம், கண்ணு தான் வேணும்.
And little things like this where the K. Vishwanath character, who is Kamal's boss, is named Srinivas and his wife is named Lakshmi.
இங்க சேஃபா இருப்பாங்கன்னா அவங்க இருக்கட்டுமே. லக்ஷ்மி
வேணாங்க.
Srinivas, Lakshmi, something religious, but then here it turns out that the man who is named after a god turns out to be a betrayer. Kind of saying that maybe you cannot trust in a god after all. But my favorite touch is this one. A key scene in this film plays out in a very, very small theatre that is showing this old film called Manalane Mangain Bhagyam. Now, it's a song that plays in the scene. It's a very famous song called Tesu Lavde Ten Malarale. Well, where's the touch, right? Kamal's name in this film is Adi Narayanan, and the music director of Manalane Mangen Bhagyam is Adi Narayana Rao. Now, these are the kind of cinematic nuggets that keep drawing us back to films like Kuruthipunal, to all Kamal films, in fact. Whether you like them or not, they keep drawing you back because there is just so much in them and so much to delve into. So happy 25th anniversary Kuruthipunal. Thank you all for watching. See you in the next episode of Flashback. Until then, stay safe and keep watching Film Companion South.